Grammar Girl here. I'm Mignon Fogarty, your friendly guide to the English language. We talk about writing, history, rules, and other cool stuff. Today, I have 2 follow-ups to recent shows, and then we'll talk about archaic words that persist in modern phrases. A couple of weeks ago, I missed an incorrect use of the word hung when I was editing an episode that mentioned Guy Fawkes being hanged for treason, instead saying he was hung for treason. So we'll start today by going over the proper use in case I confused people. The standard quip is that curtains are hung and people are hanged. It's not quite that cut and dried. Some of my reference books say hung isn't wrong, just less customary when referring to past executions. And the Random House Unabridged Dictionary says that hung is becoming more common. But the majority of my books agree that the standard English past tense of hang is hanged when you're talking about dangling people or animals from a rope, and in other cases, it's hung. It always seemed odd to me that there would be 2 past tense forms of the word hang that differ depending on their meaning. So I did a little research and found out that in Old English, there were 2 different words for hang, hone and hungyen. And the entanglement of these words, plus an Old Norse word, hangyen, is responsible for there being 2 past tense forms of the word hang today. The 2 past tense forms seem to have coexisted in English for a while with some regional differences, hung being more common in northern England, for example. Hung eventually became the dominant past tense form everywhere, except in legal uses, talking about hangings, which is a relatively common thing. The language of the law tends to change much slower than most other types of language. So that's how we ended up with 2 different forms. Today, Garner's Modern English Usage says that using hung for hanged is at stage 3 on his language change index, which he describes as widespread. The form becomes commonplace even among many well-educated people, but is still avoided in careful usage. And I confess that it does not jump out at me. In fact, the last time I covered the topic was when I misused hung the same way in a piece back in 2016. The way I tell people to remember the difference, besides the curtains are hung quip, is to think of Yosemite Sam saying, "Well, I'll be hanged," since there were a lot of hangings in the Old West. Maybe that'll work better for you than it apparently does for me. And thanks to the listeners who wrote to me about it. Last week, I mentioned that pair can be singular or plural, so you might be wondering what's up with that. Well, a pair is 2 of something, but a pair can be singular or plural. It's one of those odd English nouns, like couple, that can be singular or plural depending on how you're thinking of the people or items in question. If you're thinking of the 2 things as separate entities, you use the plural verb. For example, let's say someone named Hans has 2 schnauzers entered in a dog show. Someone might say, Hans's pair are both good candidates to win, treating pair as plural. The pair are good candidates because they're 2 distinct dogs. On the other hand, if you're thinking of the pair of something as a single entity, like a pair of scissors or a pair of shoes, you treat pair as singular. You might get excited when you see your favorite Hokas on the discount rack and pull your friend over while saying, "This pair is on sale." This pair is because you're going to pay 1 price, and you're thinking of those shoes as one thing. It gets trickier for me when you use the plural noun with pair. For example, I'd want to say, "Your pair of scissors are on the table," not "Your pair of scissors is on the table." Using the singular, even though it's only one thing, sounds wrong to me when the plural noun scissors comes right before the verb. But the American Heritage Dictionary and Merriam-Webster's Dictionary of English Usage both say I'm wrong. Neither of them cite exceptions to the rule, and the American Heritage Dictionary is emphatic, saying, quote, "The singular is always used when pair denotes the set taken as a single entity," unquote, and uses the example, "This pair of shoes is on sale." So that seems really to be the rule. I don't want to lead you astray, but I think I'd be likely to rewrite the sentence so I don't have to say it that way. So that's the deal with pair being both singular and plural. It's plural when the pair is two separate things, and singular when the pair is one thing. And what about a pair of twins? Well, it turns out there's a little bit of confusion about that phrase too, because some people take the phrase literally and argue that since twins already means two people, a pair of twins has to be four people. But the phrase a pair of twins is the common idiom we use to talk about two people who happen to be twins. All the style guides agree. A pair of twins is two people. The only thing you have to think about here is whether pair of twins is redundant or unnecessary. If you're writing something like, they have a pair of twins, just writing, they have twins, almost always works just as well. And finally, I mentioned at the beginning that pair is like couple, so let's talk about that. Couple and pair are both what we call collective nouns, nouns that describe a group. But they're both a little different from the other collective nouns like team, family, and orchestra. In American English, we usually treat those collective nouns as singular, and in British English, they usually treat those nouns as plural. So in American English, we'd write, the team is on the field, and in British English, they'd write, the team are on the field. But couple and pair are both about groups that include only two people, and they both have this "it depends on how you think about it" rule going on. So with couple, as with pair, if you're thinking of the couple as a single unit, you treat the word like a singular noun. And if you're thinking of the couple as two separate individuals, you treat the word like a plural noun. For example, you'd say, the couple are vacationing separately this year, because you have a sense of two individual people doing two separate things. But you'd say, each couple is going to Bermuda on a different week, because each pair, each couple, is being thought of as a unit. You just have to use your best judgment. And even though this seems tricky, the good news is that you can never really get it wrong, because you can always say you were thinking of the couple as individuals or as a unit if someone questions your verb choice. When you were a child, did you ever hear that someone was waiting with bated breath and wonder what the heck that meant? Maybe you heard the word is baited, B-A-I-T-E-D, and thought of a worm wiggling on a hook. Yuck, worm breath. But baited in this phrase is spelled differently, B-A-T-E-D, and its meaning has nothing to do with fish bait. Baited is a shortened form of the word abated, meaning reduced or lessened. In the context of the phrase bated breath, it means you're holding back or restraining your breathing because you're anxious, in suspense, or excited. The shortened form baited appears to have been first used by Shakespeare in 1596 in The Merchant of Venice. He wrote, "Shall I bend low and, in a bondsman's key, with bated breath and whispering humbleness, say this?" Over time, baited became the standard spelling in this phrase, and we continued to use abated in other contexts. These days, we only seem to use the word baited as part of the phrase bated breath. You'll almost never hear it anywhere else. Baited is an archaic word, and when we talk about archaic words, we're basically referring to old-fashioned words that aren't used in everyday speech anymore. These words might pop up in old books, historical documents, or even in legal language. But if you tried to use them in a normal conversation today, people would probably give you weird looks. The interesting thing is, some of these archaic words stick around in certain phrases or sayings, even after they've fallen out of use otherwise. Let's look at some others. Wreak basically means to cause or inflict something, usually something bad or destructive. When we say wreak havoc, we're talking about causing damage or chaos. A family of rabbits can wreak havoc on a vegetable garden. A toddler could wreak havoc on the living room walls with a pack of markers, but let's hope those things don't happen. Wreak comes from an Old English word, reckon, which means to drive out, punish, or avenge. Reek is actually related to the word wreck. They both come from the same ancient root. But while wreck went down the path of destruction and ruin, reek stuck to the cause or inflict definition. These days, you'll mostly hear wreak paired with havoc, but sometimes people might say things like wreak vengeance or wreak punishment if they're feeling extra dramatic or old school. Fro is basically an old way of saying from. When we say to and fro, we're talking about moving back and forth, like a ping pong ball bouncing between two players or a dog scampering to and fro as it plays. Fro comes from the Old English word fra, which meant from or away. In the context of the phrase to and fro, to means toward. So when you say something is moving to and fro, you're saying it's moving toward and away. These days, you'll pretty much only hear fro in the phrase to and fro. Throes, Throes, refers to an intense struggle, pain, or distress. When we say someone is in the throes of something, we mean they're right in the middle of a really tough or intense experience. It's like being tangled in a web. You're stuck in the middle of something overwhelming and trying to break free from all sides. Originally, throes was used to talk about the pain of dying, but now we use it for all sorts of intense situations. It comes from an Old English word thraw, which meant pain or agony. Before that, it traces back to even older Germanic words related to twisting or turning. Imagine twisting in pain, not fun. Today, we mostly use throes in the phrase in the throes of. You might hear things like, the company is in the throes of a major restructuring, or they're in the throes of a nasty divorce. Even though throes is plural, we almost always use it with singular meaning, or to refer to a bunch of challenges collectively. You don't hear about just one throw. We think of the word fell as in the past tense of fall. Mark fell down and skinned his knee yesterday. It can also be used in the context of making a tree fall, as in an arborist will fell the badly infected tree in the park tomorrow. But in the phrase, in one fell swoop, fell means cruel, deadly, or destructive. We're talking about doing something all at once, usually in a sudden or ruthless way. This fell comes from a word in Old French that's pronounced the same but spelled fel, meaning cruel or treacherous. That word came from the medieval Latin fellow, which is where we get the word felon, as in a criminal. In one fell swoop is another phrase we can thank Shakespeare for. In Macbeth, Macduff talks about how his family was murdered at one fell swoop, like a bird of prey diving down to grab its dinner in one go. Like all the other words we've discussed, you're unlikely to hear the word fell with this particular meaning outside the phrase one fell swoop. Language is always evolving, but some old words cling to relevance in the phrases we use without thinking. They're remnants of the past to remind us that while the way we speak may change, the ideas and emotions behind our words endure. So next time you say you're waiting with bated breath, you'll know you're keeping a little piece of history alive. That segment was written by Karen Lundy, a former Quick and Dirty Tips editor who's crafted hundreds of articles on the art of writing well. She was an online education pioneer, founding one of the first online writing workshops. These days, she provides writing tips and writing coach services at helpmewritebetter.com. Finally, I have a Familect story.
Hi Mignon, this is Dallas Kennedy with a Familect story. You might remember me from your book tours, and we have some friends in common. Your recent episode about speech errors and substitutions prompted me to write this down and get it to you. I've been thinking about it for a while. When my daughter Sophia was age 3 or 4 or 5, she would mangle words by switching consonants. The ones I remember include farfels for flowers, kibaz for because, and adgerlies for allergies. There were others, I'm sure, but I don't remember them. I said to Sophia she should occasionally go back to this cute toddler mangling of words, as she'll outgrow it eventually, like touching the tip of her nose with the tip of her tongue. That's my Familect story. Thanks.
Thanks, Dallas. I absolutely remember you, and I've enjoyed following you on social media ever since we met at my book signing. Thanks for coming out all those years ago, and thanks for the cute Familect stories today. If you want to share your Familect, the story of a word your family and only your family uses, call the voicemail line at 83321-4GIRL or send it to me through a WhatsApp voice chat. You'll find both in the show notes. And be sure to tell me the story behind your Familect, because that's always the best part. And I have one last piece of fun news. Grammarpalooza subscribers are going to get a bonus episode tomorrow. I talked about a classic satirical dictionary called The Devil's Dictionary by Ambrose Bierce, with Jim Norena, a copy editor in the San Francisco Bay Area, who I also met many years ago at one of my book signings. We laugh through some of the hilarious definitions, but also marvel over Bierce's wild life and discover the surprising reason he may have called himself a devil. If you want to support the show and get this fun episode, you can sign up right in Apple Podcasts or visit quickanddirtytips.com/bonus to learn more. And all those will be in the show notes too. So much in the show notes these days. Grammar Girl is a Quick and Dirty Tips podcast. Thanks to Holly Hutchings in digital operations, Dan Feyerabend in audio, Morgan Christensen in advertising, Brandon Getchus, director of podcasts, Davina Tomlin in marketing, and Nat Hoops in marketing, whose middle name is Benjamin Franklin. And I'm Mignon Fogarty, better known as Grammar Girl, and author of the Tip-A-Day book, The Grammar Daily. That's all. Thanks for listening.